SPV3's remake of the classic fan mod Lumoria is very hard to talk about in the same way it was probably hard for many reviewers to discuss the anniversary editions of Halo, or I guess any remaster for that matter. Do you review the package you got? What if I criticize an issue that was actually inherited by the original version? Does this mean I just review the changes made with the remaster or remake? What if some folks don't care to watch my review of the original Lumoria, and then come back to this video so they can understand what I reference? This is the situation I was stuck in when writing the script for this video. There's an old script that I chucked at the 11th hour, which was this confusing mess. It had no point because I struggled to figure out how to review Lumoria on SPV3, but now I think I do. If you recall, my big takeaway from the original fan campaign, Lumoria, was that the artists behind it valued the spiritual and otherworldly aspects of the franchise. They valued the idea of a hopeful and ambitious humanity that stands defiantly against a superior foe on the creations of ancient and sleeping gods. The spiritual aspect of Halo. Some of the developers took what they learned from their experience with Lumoria and went on their own separate ways to do great things, with one project in particular being quite good too. I plan to play it this year. But the mod for Combat Evolved, SPV3, the gigantic and technically impressive brainchild of the head, masters, and countless skilled modders, recently got an update that included with it a remake of Lumoria within the framework of SPV3. I know Masters personally. He and I will occasionally have these long Discord calls that go on for hours, where he'll unload many things he finds interesting and fascinating at the time. Masters, above all things, values the mechanical rhythms of play in a Halo game. He holds a very specific set of opinions and principles about what makes Halo fun to play as a game. And I've always felt that SPV3 was not just a mod for us players, it was also a sandbox for Masters to experiment and discover things about Halo for himself. He's a very iterative person. Masters' personal vision for Halo is never done. It's always iterating on itself, sometimes to a fault in the case of base SPV3, which I do feel has one too many weapons and variables in its sandbox and encounters. But the remake of Lumoria was a chance for Masters to have a fresh palette and put what he learned from the bloated SPV3 to the test here. What was my experience with SPV3's Lumoria, and what did it tell me about Masters and where SPV3 could be heading? Well, I'll tell you. When starting your new campaign for Lumoria, a retooled intro text dump is shown to the player, and while being much tidier, it tells a bleaker story. Reach has fallen to the Covenant, and will the Pillar of Autumn escape to the stars on its own journey? Our ship, the Endless Horizon, went a different way. They're traveling to the source of the Covenant's overwhelming technological advantage, an artificial world called Lumoria. With nothing left to lose and Earth close to being discovered, a team is sent to the surface to find out how to halt the Covenant war machine and buy Earth some time. When said research team goes radio silent, it's up to Spartan May and her crew of Marines to rescue them. Further reflecting Masters' preference towards gameplay, the mod omits the first cutscene and throws you right onto the surface of the planet. Immediately, differences are apparent. Well, the geometry is obviously familiar to me and anyone who played Lumoria. The aesthetic is quite different. It takes on the grittier aesthetic of SPV3. Forerunner metals are straight up rusting, weapons are scuffed up and clearly showing their age, and the Covenant sport incredibly dark color schemes. The natural palette of the original Combat Evolved and Lumoria by extension was very similar to a mountainous region in the United States with tall pine and waterfalls leading into creek beds, and SPV3 goes a bit further and even started to seriously remind me of the atmosphere of Washington State, specifically Seattle, ironically where Halo's developers are now housed. I'm not sure if this was intentional, I can't imagine it was, but impressive vistas and waterfalls will now bounce tiny droplets of water onto your visor, and if you have it activated, fake light rays will dance across your visor, and it really helps sell the look of Lumoria. I don't, however, feel that SPV3 does a good job of making Lumoria feel like a world of its own, rather just a series of play spaces for encounters. For all the issues of the original Lumoria's encounters, the developers did know how to make me take the planet seriously. The artificiality of those Covenant engagements never had me seriously fooled into thinking this was a proper Halo firefight, but the moments where a small tunnel would give way to an impressive skybox with no enemies around, meaning that I had plenty of time to take it all in, those were perfect little Halo moments that the original Lumoria definitely understood. SPV3's focus on encounters and engagements sometimes mean that you don't have these moments of downtime. You're always being distracted by a group of Covenant nearby. It was rather hard for me to immerse myself in SPV3's Lumoria because it valued its engagements over its story and world. Which isn't necessarily a fault, by the way, more of a difference between two visions. And SPV3 Lumoria does have good encounters. If you recall, I felt the base campaign of SPV3 has become a victim to how many years were spent adding and adding and iterating and adding, and the end game of the campaign kind of collapses. Lumoria's Sandbox is incredibly focused and tidy. It fits somewhere in the middle of Combat Evolved and Halo 3. It places value on utility weapons, i.e. the weapons that you use to do most of the killing, with your secondary slot being reserved for a role-based weapon that you can whip out when the situation calls for one. The reason, though, that I mention Halo 3 is because the mod also values some weapons that are simply just fun to use on lower difficulties. Masters and I constantly argued about this when it came to Halo 3's Sandbox, and here, in his own creation, he accidentally allowed for a bit of Halo 3 fun. And the weapons do feel fun. The animation and sound work of SPV3 continues to be alarmingly good, sometimes even better and more readable than the work in modern Halo titles. Seriously, the animators and the people who designed the sound for this mod are really good and talented people, and I hope wherever they are currently, they're doing some impressive work in titles of their own. New weapons such as the Brute Spiker are incredibly fun to simply just fire at a wall. The way your screen rumbles, the way the gun coughs and chugs as it flings molten metal. It's a good feeling gun. The new battle rifle isn't bad either. It still suffers from the odd slowdown and inconsistencies that seem to plague burst weapons in general in Combat Evolved's engine, but the slower fire rate leads to it feeling a bit more consistent than its counterpart in the base campaign. An area that I do think the mod continues to demonstrate issues with, though, are beam-focused weapons. As you continue to fight your way through Lumoria, you'll find sentinel weapons, and like the base SPV3 campaign, they just kind of feel off here. It's a bit hard to explain, but it feels like you're flinging glowing pieces of paper rather than a directed beam of energy. The weapons are doing damage, but they never feel like it. The rather weak sound design and animations don't help. The light rifle especially just feels half-finished. The way it just kind of limply bobs in your hand and the very soft sound of it, it lacks recoil, it lacks punch. I don't feel like I'm actually firing anything. The focus rifle also continues to be the most infuriating weapon in the game. Not because of the role it fits into, it works within that role, but because of its entire presentation. I'm not sure if it's Combat Evolved's engine, but the sound effect just sounds broken. It's a loud, ear-piercing screech that is very jarring and sudden. It sounds more like the jackals are firing at me in the distance with 10-year-olds blowing into their microphones on Xbox Live. This is a very bad sound for a gun. It sounds broken, and thankfully somebody on Twitter told me that a better, clean sound for the gun is on the way, so hopefully that fixes up whatever issues I have with this thing. On a positive note, SPV3's Lumoria vehicle sequences I feel do a great job of combining the Warthog Run vibe of Halo 2 and 3's with the exploration of Combat Evolved's. Frequently, it's wise to jump out for a quick second and just explore the area. Sometimes you can stumble upon a cool hidden weapon like this pink plasma pistol that fires vortexes when charged up, or find terminals. The Covenant terminals actually detail why the Covenant has such an edge in the war. It's pretty cool to get a little peek into the head of the enemy as I continue my conquest through the SPV3 Lumoria campaign. This remake is a well-paced, well-executed sandbox using the levels of the base mod and creating incredibly fun engagements and situations. It's really fun to play as a Halo experience. Unfortunately, beyond that, I feel that Masters' fascination with experimentation harms the charm of Lumoria the Original. Masters has an interesting relationship with the Reclaimer games for Halo. He likes what they do in theory, but feels they need a better execution, and you see this a lot in his mod. The mod has Masters' spin on Spartan Charge. The mod has a battle rifle that has aiming down the sights and sports an aesthetic that's more in line with the Reclaimer saga than traditional Halo. It even features a revive system like Halo 5. While playing SPV3's take on Lumoria, I had to ask myself, are all of these weird Halo 5 experiments done for the player, or done for Masters' own curiosity on if it can be done? His hacked together aiming down the sights animation is neat, but was it necessary for gameplay? Probably not. It's impressive that he was able to script a revive system, which is actually harder than you would think. I saw how buggy it was during development. But was it necessary? I'd argue it actually slows things down. The original Lumoria just had Brandon, your AI buddy, be invincible, and that worked fine. In fact, the revive mechanic actually seems very goofy when you see Brandon die and be revived over and over again over the course of the campaign until the one time that he can't be revived in a cutscene, which I guess is where we can start to talk about the story. For all of its issues, the original Lumoria had a story that it felt it wanted to tell, and it did its best at the time to tell it. SPV3's Lumoria story doesn't feel like a story. It feels like another series of experiments, this time with narrative elements from other Halo games. The mod tries to be a lot more grim and serious, which feels like Masters' fascination with that side of Halo. And then the AI from the original game is replaced, unironically, with a Guardian. Sure, the Guardian is sporting a much better design here that looks more in line with what the Forerunners look like, but Guardians are still a sore spot for me. They were the poster boys of a game that really tested my faith in the Halo franchise, and there's something I'd rather quickly move on from, but here one is in Combat Evolved. Just because Combat Evolved's Forerunner depiction is less monstrous and actually more weirdly caring. The Halo ring is portrayed as a thing that the Forerunners did when everything else failed, not because they actually wanted to use it. Guilty Spark didn't start out bloodthirsty all those years ago. That's what years and years to break down and malfunction do to an AI. And in the original Lumoria, the evil AI didn't start out that way either. It was time that corrupted it. It started out as a curious thing, and it grew a garden world just so it could watch life grow and gain a better understanding of the biological world. Halo 5's Guardians are antithetical to not just the tone of Lumoria, the original mod, but Halo Combat Evolved itself. So what is one doing here? I can only assume the reason it was put into the game is because Masters saw something that fundamentally didn't work in Halo 5 and wanted to experiment and see if he could get it working. And it doesn't work. It makes the mod less likable. The original Lumoria ended on this very hopeful and adventurous note, a kind of the adventures could continue in the future vibe, as May takes off her helmet as a wink to the audience in the same way Chief did in the base campaign of Combat Evolved. SPV3 here just feels pointlessly bittersweet and even omits May taking off her helmet. That being said, it may sound like I didn't like the SPV3 Lumoria, and I'd actually argue that wasn't my takeaway at all. Masters was not interested in the story. That was just a little place where he experimented with some things he's been thinking about the newer Halo games. He was more interested in the gameplay and the sandbox, and I do feel that is where SPV3's Lumoria shines. That is why you want to play it, and that's the experience that it wants to deliver to you. There's a lot of careful consideration and a level of restraint that the base campaign lacks in places, and I feel that this is an incredibly solid foundation to build upon going forward for future Halo projects. I enjoy the SPV3 Lumoria's gameplay and encounters. This was a good Halo experience. Masters is working on a proper firefight mode for SPV3, and it will be using the Lumoria Sandbox, and that has me very interested. And what I'm more interested in is what he'll be doing next. SPV3 is a demonstration of what Masters values in Halo, and what he values is the sandbox and the gameplay, and SPV3 Lumoria has a damn good sandbox and pretty solid gameplay. When it comes to the original Lumoria versus SPV3 Lumoria, I can't honestly say that one is better than the other, because these two projects have very different things to say about what Halo means to them. The canvas of Lumoria has shown us all two very different versions of Halo, and it's a dialogue that's very interesting to experience. I'd be curious to hear how the original developers feel on this different take, and for all of you in the comments, I want to hear your opinions on Lumoria as well. On top of that, let me know what you'd like me to do a video on in the future, and with that, I'll see you guys on the next video.